For joining us. President Biden is preparing for his first face-to-face meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin since taking office. The trip caps off a week of discussions with foreign leaders at NATO and the G7 summits. The White House says the president sought input from U.S. allies on how to approach tomorrow's talks in Switzerland. President Biden last met the Russian leader 10 years ago when he was still vice president. At that meeting, Mr. Biden says he told Putin, quote, "I'm looking into your eyes and I don't think you have a soul." The president is expected to confront Putin on Russia's latest aggressive actions, including allegations of election meddling and cyber hacking. CBS News' Natalie Brand has a preview of tomorrow's summit.
America is back on the global scene. It's great news.
After a warm welcome by European Union leaders, President Biden and the EU talked trade this morning in Brussels.
So I think we have an enormous opportunity.
The U.S. and EU announced an end to a Boeing-Airbus trade dispute over airline subsidies and agreed to a 5-year suspension of tariffs imposed during the Trump administration.
It's overwhelming the interest of the United States of America to have a great relationship with NATO and with the EU. I have a very different view than my predecessor did.
This show of cooperation with European allies is deliberate. It comes ahead of Wednesday's face-to-face meeting between President Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Switzerland.
He is a worthy adversary.
The high-stakes summit follows recent cyber attacks on U.S. infrastructure by criminals likely based in Russia. Putin has denied the allegations, but Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo tells CBS News it's clear who's behind the attacks.
I think we all know that that isn't true. There is plenty of proof that a number of cyber attacks in the past few years have come from Russia.
President Biden is also expected to confront Putin about Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the fate of jailed opposition leader Alexei Navalny. A new CBS News poll finds most Americans, 58%, want the president to take a tough stand with Putin. Natalie Brand, CBS News, the White House.
I want to bring in former CBS News Moscow bureau chief Beth Knobel. She's in Guilford, Connecticut. Beth, welcome. Great to have you with us. What can we expect out of the meeting between President Biden and President Putin? Are we looking at any kind of significant conflict resolution, or will this just be an airing of grievances?
Well, there's definitely going to be some airing of grievances, but just the fact that the two presidents are sitting down is actually kind of a hopeful sign. They definitely don't have to be meeting, and they're choosing to. They both say that they're looking for a sense of stability in the relationship, and things have been very tense between the United States and Russia for several years now, since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014. And I think the two presidents know they have to find some ways to disagree, but to also look for areas where they can make some joint work to work on the things that are important to both of them, like issues of world peace and climate change.
And so how does the Biden administration confront someone like Putin, who has a history, really, of doing as he pleases, despite years of sanctions and criticism?
Yeah, dealing with Putin is very, very tricky. He has been in power for over 20 years. This will be the 5th American president that he's meeting. He knows how to make himself clear. And he also understands that the West doesn't have a lot that it can do to that it hasn't already done, like putting sanctions on Russia to make its displeasure clear. I think what President Biden has to do is to show Putin some respect, to say, I understand where you're coming from. I know that your first interest is the interest of your own people, to protect Russia, to further Russian interests. But, we've got to see what we can do together to make this world a better place. So I think if he starts with some respect, at least there's a chance that they'll hear each other.
Very good point. All right. So, of course, unlike former President Trump, President Biden says he will not hold a joint press conference with President Putin after their meeting. Can you talk about that and why it's significant?
Well, it's very unusual for any two presidents to forego a joint press conference. My understanding is that President Biden prepared for this meeting by calling in a bunch of American experts on Russia. This included a couple of former Russian U.S. ambassadors to Russia, and that he sat down with this team and he sort of had these mock discussions about what it would be like, and that these members of the team, who I have to note included people from both Democratic and Republican administrations, said to him, look, we don't think it's a good idea to hold a joint presser, because if you do, the only thing that can happen is that you can disagree in public, and that's not good for anyone. So have your disagreements in private and then come out, and that gives you the power to kind of stress what was positive about the meeting. But this is almost unprecedented that this would happen. But I think in terms of Biden's point of view, it's actually very astute.
Right. And Beth, what about concerns over Ukraine's effort to join NATO? How is that campaign influencing U.S.-Russian relations?
Well, President Putin has made it very clear that he does not want Ukraine in NATO, that is something that Russia has been against since the Soviet Union fell apart. And some of the former Soviet states, like the Baltic nations, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, did join NATO. On the other hand, President Biden has said, well, the process is underway. Ukraine's president is pushing very hard for NATO membership because he understands that Ukraine can't possibly go up against Russia militarily, and that the only thing he has that could possibly be a counterweight to Russian power is NATO. But if you're a NATO country, you're looking at the situation in Ukraine and saying, wow, do I really want to get involved here in a country where Russia has actually taken over part of their land? I think most of NATO is just saying, hey, Ukraine, we're very sympathetic to what you're going through, but this is a mess, and we really don't want a part of it.
You know, to sort of put some of this into perspective for our American audience, you know, when asked why Americans should care about the Ukraine-Russian conflict, Ukraine's president told CBS News, quote, it can be tomorrow in their houses. Experts also say Russia is using Ukraine as a hacking test site before launching similar tactics in the U.S. So, you know, what do experts say are the biggest concerns there from a U.S. perspective, and how is the Biden administration addressing them?
Well, certainly just the fact that Russia felt empowered to invade part of another country is worrying for America and worrying for every country. But the reason that Putin did it is probably because he knew he could get away with it, that Ukraine was very weak and that NATO would not want to come in on the side of Ukraine because it doesn't want to get involved in a war with Russia. So in some respect, we as Americans, you know, don't have to worry that we're going to get in a war with Russia anytime soon. This isn't the Soviet Union. Some of us remember as kids having to do drills where we crawled under our desks in case of a nuclear war. That's not the situation that we're in right now, thankfully. But there are a lot of things that are going on in Russia that do affect us as Americans. For example, there has been election meddling by Russia. This is American intelligence services say there is no question whatsoever that Russia has meddled in American elections. Intelligence services have also said that there's no doubt that Russia has been responsible for many of the cyber attacks that we have seen in America. And that includes attacks on government agencies and also attacks on private companies that led to giant disruptions in the gasoline supply this spring. So we as Americans can't just look at Russia and say, oh, that's thousands of miles from us. That doesn't matter. Russia has the power to influence life in America. And that is something that President Biden clearly understands. And there's no question he's going to say to President Putin, you know, we don't want you doing this. We don't want Russian cyber attacks anymore. We don't want Russian meddling. What's not clear is whether those words will actually do anything to stop the Russians from doing the things they're doing, and maybe even do more.
No doubt Russia will prove to be one of the thorniest elements of his administration's foreign policy. Beth Knobel, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.